And one of the last sunny days of September in 2019, I was trekking across town with waterproof boots and a jacket and my hiking pack, which was full of 48 liters worth of base layers and foul weather gear. I had taken an extended leave of absence from work, and I was headed to Dunleary to spend the next 4 months on a sailboat in the Irish Sea. And when I arrived at the marina, I met the 4 men who were going to be my new housemates and got a tour of our new home, which was a 37-foot, 11-meter boat with 3 cabins, small cabins, and a folding table that revealed 2 other spots to sleep in. And we sat down around the table, and our instructor went over what we were signing up for again. And it was the Yachtmaster Offshore professional course, 4 months of sailing exercises, navigation courses, weather safety courses, and 2,500 nautical miles of offshore sailing, which would all culminate in a 2-day on-boat exam in the middle of December. And then we started going around talking about what we wanted to get out of the course. And every single one of the men on board said they wanted to work in the sailing industry. And when it got to me, I panicked and I said something about, maybe I want to work in the sailing industry. I just love sailing and I wanted a challenge. But the real reason was because I had hit a wall in my personal life outside. I had spent the last 2 years dealing with, or I guess avoiding, the grief of my mother's passing. And I had thrown myself into work. I'd shut out all the things that reminded me of her. And as a result, I had become burnt out. I felt powerless, useless as a friend and a partner. And I needed something to bring me back to that sense of who she was, the part of me that was tied to her, the sense of adventure and the wild spirit that I had been avoiding because it reminded me so much of her. So I decided that the right thing to do was to take on this professional yachtmaster course, just to shock myself back into reality. And so I took it on, and I didn't tell anybody on board, what I was there to do to try to recover this part of myself that I had lost. And it was okay. I didn't think it would come up. So I went forward into the next couple of months, and they were fine. It didn't come up for a while. We were just, tooling around Dublin Bay, going up and down the coast, and I was having a great time, and I was loving sailing. But there was this thing in the back of my head about what we were going to have to do towards the end, the Mile Builders, which was 500 miles. It was 4 one-week-long passages where we'd sail through the night to try to get up the amount of miles we needed to qualify as skippers for the exam. And this really kind of spooked me, because there's one little thing about my love of sailing that was a problem, which is that I tend to get a little bit seasick. And oh man, did I get sick. See, the winter had set in, and we were getting loads of easterly winds, and because the weather was getting worse, we were running across to Wales and then back to Arklow, and we were just doing these constant passages, and something about the way those short, kind of choppy waves hit always, like clockwork, set me off at about 3 hours in on the passage to Wales. I'd be chucking up breakfast, and then it would stay that way for days. And I was bouncing back and forth between trimming sails and leaning over the rails and throwing up. And I felt utterly useless. And as the days were getting shorter, the night watch got worse. And we would be 2 hours on, 2 hours off. And I'd wake up with my alarm, and I'd pour myself in to my foul weather gear, trying to balance and feeling weak. And I would always grab this steadfast companion of a bailing bucket. And I'd go up on deck, and I'd sit there at 3 a.m. scanning the darkness, looking for ships when my head wasn't in the bucket, and just wondering what the hell I was thinking and what I was doing there. And at one of the stopover anchorages, as we approached it, I had been particularly sick on this passage. And so I decided that, as we were passing through, I was going to rinse out my precious bucket. And I leaned over the side, and I had a rope tied to it. And I sat, I didn't tie it off. I didn't think I was underestimating my weakness. And it filled with water and ripped out of my hands and slipped behind us. And our instructor noticed, and he was a skipper on round-the-world races. He'd been in the Southern Ocean. So he saw a teachable moment, and he yelled, "Man overboard." And as we'd been taught to do, we whipped round, we brought the boat round, and he shouted, "Who has eyes on him? Who has eyes on him?" And everybody looked at me, and I realized I didn't. I'd lost it. And the instructor turned to me and said, "That's how quick you can lose a man out there." And it suddenly hit me of the sort of the dangerous situation that I'd put myself in, and that I felt that I was useless to my crew. And that night, I thought about ways I could quit, excuses I could use. But by the time I was starting to try to think of an excuse, we got to the next mile builder passage, and I hadn't thought of a good excuse yet, so I showed up, and I downed the Studron and the ginger chews and strapped a pressure point bracelet to each wrist, and I was going to white knuckle it through and get my skipper miles on this passage. And 3 hours in, I was sick. But something happened on the way where the wind picked up and it shifted directions, and it started howling, and it was near gales. And I felt great. And my watch was starting, and the relief of not being seasick anymore, I rushed on deck to relieve the crew who were on deck before me. And I realized that though we were supposed to be approaching the Isle of Man, we couldn't see it because there was a dark cloud hanging over it, and it was just impossible to see the actual land. And I realized that there was a squall coming right at the start of my watch. So I told the crew, I knew we were going to go from near gales to gales, and there's rain expected, and I told the crew to reef the sails so we'd reduce our surface area so we weren't as exposed, and to lock down the cabin below. And they went down, and then seconds after they were down there, the wind picked up, the rain started, and the hail set in. And I was shouting down our bearings to get course corrections, and it was just absolutely miserable weather out there. And the crew were handing me up gloves. I soaked through every single pair of gloves on that boat, and I was absolutely loving it. I stayed at the helm around the island. I skippered all the way down to Holyhead in Wales, and when I stepped off the boat, finally, I went to get a shower, and I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror in the locker room, and my hair was absolutely wild, and I was, at some point, I had burst a blood vessel in my eye, and Nobody told me. So I had all this blood in there. And I looked at myself and I just thought, I look absolutely wild. And I haven't lost her. She's in there somewhere. And I'm not going to quit. I'm going to keep moving forward. Thank you.